I'm the Reverend Dr. Jenny McKay, veterinarian, curate and minister in secular employment, environmentalist, activist and self-confessed cat junkie. But believe it or not, I have never had an encyclopedic knowledge of London bus routes, but someone who does is my guest, the Reverend Liz Clutterbuck. So Liz, we'll get the important question out of the way first of all. Do you still have an in-depth knowledge of London bus routes? And if so, what's your favourite route?
That's a really good question. I feel like in my defense, I should say that the reason I originally set out to learn bus routes was because I, aged 11, had to commute to school in London from North London down to Westminster. And my mother's very good advice was, as pre-internet obviously, learn bus routes in case you ever get on a bus that terminates early, or there's roadworks or a diversion, or this is in the 90s, so an IRA bomb. And so it was her way of trying to help me stay safe in London, but I just got a little too into it. I wouldn't say encyclopedic, maybe of North and East London, I think is probably as far as it could go. Yeah.
And do you still use the bus quite a lot, Liz?
Oh yeah. Over and above the tube. Because you see more. If you ever come to London and you want to see London, just sit on a bus. Top deck, front. Yeah. Best way to see London.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never taken that mode of transport before in London. I'm usually down under, but that's something I'll have to give a try, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Wow. So Liz, tell us a little bit about yourself. I know that your parents were both missionaries on the Polynesian island nation of Tonga.
Yes, that's right. So they're both ordained Methodist presbyters, but I am an ordained Anglican priest. So I work in parish ministry in Holloway in North London. I'm just 5 minutes walk from the Arsenal Stadium, so that's my patch of London. And I am based half-time in the parish and half-time as director of post-ordination training for the Stepney area of London, which is basically East London, Tower Hamlets, Hackney and Islington. Okay. So I'm responsible for helping to train curates following their ordination for 3 years.
So that would have been people like me.
Exactly, yeah.
And did your interest in the church begin at an early age? Was it influenced by your parents?
Yes, I mean, I think there's a running joke that children of clergy kind of go in one of two directions. It's either into the church themselves or running for the hills and becoming an atheist. And I think I was really lucky to live in a family where, we talked about everything. Like dinner time was a real time of conversation and asking questions. And I think for any child who grows up in a Christian home, regardless of whether their parents are ordained, there comes a moment where you have to be able to claim your faith as your own, distinct from your parents, in order to fully embody what it means to be a Christian. And I, grew up when I went to church schools, and I started taking communion when I was 9 or 10. And, I knew all of the stuff, I knew my Bible, I knew all of that. But I definitely had a moment when I was 13, turning 14, and my dad had decided to take a job as a theological college principal in Gloucester. We were living in North London. And unsurprisingly for a teenager, I was not very happy about having to move. And I very much had a sort of, Dad says God is calling him to this new job. But if God wants me to go there too, he better show it. Because I'm having to leave my school and my friends and, all of this kind of thing. And actually, God was really faithful in that move. And that was the moment at which I was able to kind of work out what it meant for myself to be a Christian. And actually, when we moved, my parents, for a while, we went to the same church, but they then found a church that suited them better. I carried on going to the one we'd started going to that had a decent youth group, and it was the 90s when alt worship was getting going, and I joined the alt worship group, and was able to start navigating my own course apart from my parents and their role in the church.
Right. So that move over to England really cemented your faith for you, didn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's the thing, we see various points particularly in children's lives where faith can get lost along the way.
Yes.
And it seems to be getting younger and younger. And, moving to secondary school is one, when they start having more homework, and teenagers, where you start doing sport on a Sunday, that kind of thing. But a big one's always been university. And I think that because I had this experience as a teenager of almost like choosing which church I wanted to worship at, when I moved away for university and I came back to London, I had this moment of like, I'd already done the navigating what it means to choose your church and kind of choose your people. And so I didn't get lost at that point, which I know is a point where a lot of people who've only ever just gone to church with their parents, they don't really know what to do about finding a church or what it means to be a Christian as a young adult. So yeah, I think I kind of navigated that already.
Yeah, you're right. That does happen to lots of people. Yeah, that's very common. You drift away, don't you, when you do go to uni, and lots of other things are pulling you in different directions. So what about this connection to Tonga as well? Do you still go back to Tonga sometimes?
So I've only been back once, when the summer I turned 19. It's very far away. So Tonga is 1,000 kilometers north of New Zealand. It takes over a day to get there. And it's a group of many tiny islands. You might have heard of it in the news. At the beginning of the year, there was this big volcanic explosion in the Pacific Ocean just outside of the main islands of Tonga, Tongatapu, which devastated the islands. Even now, they're still recovering from that. So it's a very delicate ecosystem, not a particularly wealthy country. A lot of the Tongan diaspora who settle in places like California and Wales, and places where you can play either rugby or American football, because that's, Tongan sport. They send a lot of funds back to the islands.
Right.
But the interesting thing is that my dad ended up there as a missionary with the Methodist Church. He taught at a theological college there, Siastutai College. But he had discovered earlier on in his ministry a missionary who was born in the village next to where he grew up in Lincolnshire, Nottinghamshire, called John Hunt, who'd been a missionary in the 19th century to Fiji. And my dad got quite inspired by this character, and then ended up in the Pacific himself, and has since been able to go and visit John Hunt's grave and all of this kind of thing. So I was just lucky, I guess, to have been born in the third year that they were there. But we have a family joke that everything that was really important in our family happened in Tonga, because it's where my dad got ordained. It's where my parents got married. My mum flew there 5 days before their marriage, and they had their wedding in Tonga without any of their family present. And then I was born 6 months before they came home. And we have this joke because it really annoys my sister, because she was born in Brent in North London. But I feel really lucky, because growing up, I was always kind of told about the times in Tonga. I have a Tongan middle name, Lesieli. And so it's always felt very much part of my identity. So I support the Tongan rugby team and get very excited when they're at the Olympics.
Yeah, that's good. And whenever England are playing, who would you support if Tonga?
If Tonga's playing England, always Tonga. Partly because they're tiny. Gloucester, another really great rugby city, has the same population size as Tonga. So if Tonga's playing England, and in actual fact, my biggest pet peeve with English rugby is how many Tongans they have poached from us. Because so Tuolangi, who is a very successful English rugby player, is actually Tongan, and Peter Levy is another one. There's quite a few.
Right.
There's a lot come over to play in the English and Welsh leagues, and then they only have to live here for 5 years before they qualify to play for the nation.
Oh, I didn't realise that. Yes, that is
a
bit cheeky, and isn't it?
One of the world's
people away. Yeah,
absolutely. One of the world's most famous rugby players, Jonah Lomu, also Tongan, but only ever played for New Zealand.
Yeah. Well, I can see why you support them. Yeah, because they really have to make the best of the people that they have and the people that stay with them.
Yeah. Although I apparently I look quite odd. So I've been to a couple of their matches and they've played over here. So when the World Cup was on a few years ago, somebody stopped me, a Tongan person stopped me in the street, saw me wearing my Tongan t-shirt and said, "How come you were supporting Tonga? You're not Tongan." And I said, I was born in Nuku'alofa. She said, you are Tongan. Great.
So they're wonderful, friendly people, I can imagine.
Well, yes, because you might know that when Captain Cook first visited the islands, he named them the Friendly Islands because of the reception that he had there. So they are known as a friendly group of islands.
Oh, as you say, climate change and everything. It's a very environmentally susceptible area at the moment, isn't it?
Very, yeah.
So you've done quite a bit of travel, Liz, in your lifetime, and I know quite recently you've had a visit over to Seattle, and that was for the Parish Collectives Inhabit conference. Can you tell me a little bit about what happened there and what was your biggest take home from the conference?
Yeah, so Parish Collective, a really interesting organisation of Christians in the States who have taken the ideas that we have in the Church of England around parish, of serving the local community, and they're really trying to explore what that means in an American context where they don't have parishes the way that we do, but maybe local churches want to be able to serve their local context in the best way possible. And so what they've done is they've gathered people from all over North America, so across the US and Canada, to share stories and experiences of what they've done in their neighborhoods, what's worked, what hasn't, what their struggles are, to come together in fellowship, particularly in a culture where, a lot of the churches in the States are massive. There's very little in the British context that compares to an American megachurch. But one of the problems with a megachurch is that it doesn't really look at doing what we'd call contextual mission. It doesn't look at what is the neighborhood that we're in, what is the neighborhood that our people come from, our congregation comes from, because they're so big, they're gathered from a huge area. So this movement is kind of trying to combat that. Jesus calls us to be in a specific place at a specific time. And so what does that look like? And it was a really valuable few days of hearing stories and hearing people go on really long journeys to develop relationships in their community. I was really touched by one woman I got to know talks about how really simply she's built relationships in her community by saying hello. It's a thing of a lot of this is not rocket science. It's really simple. But she was saying how she had to take the step of starting those conversations, but actually that's been a really rewarding way of building community. And then I also had the chance there to share something about what parish means in the Church of England and what it means in my particular parish, and to share some of our struggles, what's been difficult, particularly since COVID. And that was really interesting because on the one hand, a lot of the people at the conference couldn't believe that, we're the established church. So everybody in England has the right to be married or baptized or have their funeral in their local parish church. And this is mind blowing in America because they're like, people, like, yeah, I cannot turn somebody away from that. But then equally, you know, some of the questions I was asking around, you know, my patch of London, there are 100 parishes within 2.4 miles radius of me.
Gosh.
100. And like you kind of go, we're facing this crisis over resourcing parishes and what we do post-COVID. And there's some really big questions about whether, like, London is still a big fan of one priest, one parish, which is great, but actually, can we afford to do that? And do we need to make parishes bigger? Can we do more to lift the burden of, like, the admin of being parish from clergy who are really burdened with loads of stuff already? So it was a good opportunity for some really big questions, and also the interesting contrast between in the Church of England, this Save the Parish movement has emerged over the last year, and yet here in America, there's a group going, let's embrace the idea of parish. Let's look at what it means to be parish in our neighbourhoods. Yeah, so really, really interesting.
Yeah, and how, are they developing, do you feel, virtual ministry as well post-COVID?
Yeah, I think there's some of that. Although I think, interestingly, because these are predominantly smaller churches, so much is to do with the relationship that is formed in gatherings. It's been working out how to do that in the safest way post-COVID, which, from what I could see, and this, you know, I didn't ask this of everybody, seems to be a lot of you know, outdoor gatherings where possible. I mean, I think, just from what I have seen anecdotally, the summer seems to be about, like, outdoor, and, you know, it's part of the States, so it's much easier to do that all year round than here.
Yes.
And that maybe stuff like Zoom Church comes back in the winter.
Okay.
But that has also depended on where in the States they've been, because obviously different areas have had different attitudes to COVID. So yeah, I don't feel like virtual church came up all that much.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah, I'm just very interested in that, because that's one of my passions as well, and just seeing how that will fit in, you know, post-COVID, and with the ongoing problems, as you say, in parishes. It will be very interesting to see how that all develops. So when you were over in the States recently, you were also at those protests in Washington, weren't you, outside the Supreme Court?
I was. So the night I was really lucky to have a few days in DC after this conference in Seattle, and the night that I arrived was the night that this leaked opinion came out about Roe v. Wade in the Supreme Court. And so I went down to the Supreme Court the next afternoon. There was a rally with lots of groups. And it's one of those things. I was talking to a friend just this week who is a minister in DC. And I said to her, you know, I had a dog collar with me in my suitcase. And it crossed my mind, if I was going to a protest like that in the UK, I would have worn my collar, because I'd have felt it was really important to say, I, as a church leader, am here to protest this. But in the US, I was like, this isn't my thing. My church isn't here. But I did get talking with, there was a group of Catholics who were pro-choice that I got talking with, and an Irish woman who was on holiday in DC and had felt the need to come over and protest, and we were talking to the same group of people. But it was one of those things. I've been a big follower of US politics since I was a teenager. It's one of the things that I get quite nerdy about. Like, I really like it. So it's not something, you know, something like Roe v. Wade, you know, I had to learn for my A-level in US politics. So to be in the States at the point where it looked like that was going to get overturned felt like something that I couldn't ignore. And also a sense from friends across the States, or American friends who live over here, when they found out I was there, I got so many messages saying thank you for being there.
Right.
And so it felt to me like an act of witness that I could do. You know, there isn't a lot else that I can do in that situation, but I was like, I just need to stand here. And the thing that I found fascinating was this group of Catholics I got talking to said, oh, when you leave, make sure you check out the street, the sign that's outside. There's a United Methodist Church building almost next door to the Supreme Court. And they do a really good line. You know, those American church signs that you can kind of write, you put the letters up so it sort of says whatever you want. And they do a really good line in political signs, so in response to whatever's going on. I'm just looking up exactly what the wording is now so I don't get it wrong. But it's a really interesting moment of like speaking truth to power, which I really think is important.
Yes.
So what they'd written on their sign was, Christ values and trusts women. Follow Christ.
That is very, very powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Christ trusts women.
Yeah.
Marvelous.
Yeah. And of course, this is all happening 10 days after Easter.
Yeah.
After Easter.
Yes.
The lectionary reading the following Sunday was the raising of Tabitha, Dorcas. And again, this American minister friend I was speaking to this week, she said, you know, she preached on that passage, and she said this is about a woman who followed Christ, who was a disciple, and who was trusted by her community. And we need to listen to the voices of women.
Yes, that's right. I remember that passage because I said exactly the same thing. We hear very little of women in the Bible, but here was a strong and a powerful woman.
Yeah, the only woman who is referred to as a disciple of Christ. Yeah.
So you're very interested in US politics. I don't want to get too political here, but I know that you also visited Palestine in 2007. So that must have been another amazing experience, giving you a real feel, I suppose, for the difficulties over there.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I mean, I can't believe that that's now 15 years ago. It was July 2007, and it was I was working for the Methodist Church at the time in the World Church Office, as it was known then, and they'd had an invitation that the Methodist Church should send a young person, which basically meant somebody I think under 35, and I would have been in my mid-20s, to this international young adults conference. And so I went for 10 days, and there were people from all over Europe and the States, Palestinian Christians, and a week of, you know, meeting different organizations working in Israel Palestine. So, you know, we met with the UN, we met with an Israeli group called Breaking the Silence. We went through checkpoints. With our Palestinian friends who got held back. There was a day when people were arrested simply for being in a town that they didn't have the permit to be in. You know, all these different places. And I think every Christian who visits the Holy Land, like, it leaves an impression on them. And we did pilgrimage stuff as well as the sort of more political, humanitarian stuff. But it's very difficult, I think, once you've been there, to forget what you have seen and the experience of particularly Palestinian Christians. I mean, Palestinians full stop, but I think the world forgets that there is a Christian population there as well, and they are Palestinian, and they are subjected to inhumane laws, and it's, you know, it's a really difficult situation. And one of my favorite moments that I think about quite a lot was, we were in the town of Hebron, which is a particularly divided town, and there's a lot that goes on there, and there were volunteers from the Christian peacemaker team there, and I got talking to a South African woman. So this was 2007. She was a Black South African. She was from Soweto, and I said to her, do you look at this situation in Israel Palestine and feel any kind of hope? And she said, if you had asked me 20 years ago if I had any hope for South Africa, I would have said no. But look at what has happened in South Africa since then. And back in 2007, my parents at that point were living in Belfast, and obviously there's an awful lot, you'll know, the parallels with Northern Ireland as well. You know, communities where we have seen really dramatic changes and peace come, and with the struggles that what peace looks like in those communities. And I think that's the thing, but I now realise that's 15 years ago, and actually nothing has improved.
No, it hasn't. It hasn't. Yes, it is. It's very, very sad, isn't it? Well, we could talk about this for a long, long time. And I remember I went on a Chester diocesan pilgrimage to the Holy Land. That was in, I think, 2011. And as you say, your perceptions, and certainly as you move across borders between Israel and Palestine, the difference between those two communities is stark, isn't it? And the poor old Christian community is dwindling away, isn't it? And yet they're probably the community that can hold the others, the Jewish community and the Muslim community, in some sort of balance.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's a very, very, difficult situation over there. Heartbreaking. But if we move back to your position where you are based in Emmanuel Holloway in Islington, North London, have you noticed yourself a rise in engagement with the church over the last few years, particularly with young people?
I mean, to be honest, no, but I don't know how much that is to do with the very specific context that I'm in. So Islington gets labelled, we get called champagne socialists, and so people's view of Islington is very, middle upper class and lovely. And that's not really what Islington is like. Islington is the sixth most deprived borough in London, and the ward where my parish is the most deprived ward in that borough. And I'm looking at a population which is immigrant population, starting with like people from the Caribbean, the Windrush generation in the 60s and 50s, through to huge Ethiopian, Eritrean populations. And we serve a community where there just isn't a lot. And that's really hard, compared to the church where I did my curacy, which is literally 15 minutes walk up the hill in Highbury, which is leafy green and very middle class, where actually the children in youth work have increased and is thriving as a church school and thriving for junior church. Here it's much harder because even something simple as coming to church on Sunday is really difficult if you have to work on Sunday. There's people I've got to know who I only see at church on Easter Sunday because it's the only day that the shops where they work are closed. And I think the other thing we have struggled with here is you were talking about online church and during COVID and whether that's continuing. We couldn't do that at all. We have a congregation and live in an area where digital poverty is very high. So if somebody is only accessing the internet on a smartphone, on a pay-as-you-go contract, asking them to watch even, like a half an hour service on their data is a really big and like inappropriate ask. So that's, I think, really affected what we were able to do over the last 2 years.
Yes, that's interesting. I think as you say, the middle class, you've got access to social media. You presume it's available for everybody, but it's not, and that's a total loss of connection with that aspect of our society, isn't it?
Yeah. The thing that came into its own during the pandemic was the church WhatsApp group that we started the Sunday before lockdown, because the majority either can be in the WhatsApp group or know somebody else who's in it who can ring them up and tell them what's happened. That's what we went with. That
was useful. That was worked well. That's good. And talking of helping the community, could you tell me a little bit about your work with the Social Innovation Collective, Matryoshka House?
Matryoshka House, yeah. So Matryoshka as in the Russian babushka dolls. So the dolls where they get progressively smaller. And it doesn't exist under the name Matryoshka House anymore. It's now 3 different entities across the US and the UK. but this was quite difficult to explain. It does both the sort of social innovation, social enterprise side of things, and also had a missional community as part of it as well, which included a weekly Thursday night dinner that was an open table to anybody who wanted to come. So a gathering of people who were Christians and non-Christians, but those of us who kind of helped set it up, keep it going, most of us were doing it from a kind of a Christian worldview. So if somebody said to you, why is it that you cook a meal for 20 every week? Okay. And you don't charge for it? You're like, well, because, Jesus teaches us to share a table with one another and to offer hospitality and that kind of thing. So it was a sort of a way of doing life together. Okay. And then alongside that, an area that I've been involved with sort of professionally is a tool that Matryoshka House designed called the Transformational Index, which is a way of helping an organization or a group measure their impact. It's kind of I'm quite passionate about measurement in a church context and how we measure what actually matters, not just kind of what we're told to measure. And so that's kind of the side of things that I was involved with. I do freelance research, and when I was a curator, I was part-time, so running TI workshops across dioceses and organisations was one of the ways in which I supplemented my stipend for 3 years.
Right. Okay. So you are still involved in that.
Yes. Yeah. So every so often I'll get a call. So the British arm of it is now called the Curiosity Society. That's where the TI sits. And so they work with organisations like Church Mission Society, and they've done a lot of work with dioceses who've received strategic development funding, so the SBS funds. So every so often I'll get a call saying, do you have any time to do a workshop or some interviews with people? Which is good fun because it keeps my hand in the research world, and I get to meet really interesting people and have conversations with them.
Yeah, wonderful. But you will be very, very limited in time.
Yes. But
it's so what do you do to relax? I think I read somewhere that you wouldn't be interested in reading or watching The Lord of the Rings. Is that right?
No. Do you know, actually, no member of my immediate family has ever read or watched The Lord of the Rings. It's very like a Clutterbuck badge of honour. We do not do Lord of the Rings. So one of my favourite things on a day off, so my day off is usually a Friday. If there is a morning screening of a film that I want to see at a cinema where I have membership, that is like my ideal Friday morning, because the phone is off, you're in a dark room watching a moderately good film. And also it turns out a lot of people don't go to cinema on a Friday morning, so I quite often have screenings almost to myself. So that's great. And then I'm lucky to live in like the best city in the world, so that's a lot of fun. During the lockdown last year, my bubble, we came up with a plan of going for a lockdown walk every Saturday using a guidebook of hidden London walks. So anything that gives me more fascinating facts about London and things to look out for, those kind of things. Yeah.
Well, those both sound very, very relaxing things to do, to take you away from the main job.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think a lot of people in lockdown, they found out that there are places close to where they live that they just didn't realise were there.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, coming back to, we were talking about parish ministry. I think it was an opportunity to really get to know your parish, like your patch. I did more, because I did so much walking around delivering things to people in the congregation. It was a lot of that kind of classic image of the vicar. I wasn't wearing my cassock, I'm not in that tradition, but marching around with a sheaf of papers through the doors, and and stopping and talking to people you met on the street, because actually it was amazing around here how many people you did bump into if you went out down the main road. And
so something good came out of that terrible time.
Yeah
And something maybe not so good is the curse of the hot priest. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I guess it must be 3 years ago now. Fleabag, which is amazing. I love Fleabag. I think it's one of the best TV programs ever made.
She's good.
Series 2 features this character, the hot priest. I think he's only ever referred to as the priest in the credits, but he is like universally acknowledged to be the hot priest, Andrew Scott. And there was a really interesting. So I'm always interested, probably as you are, whenever clergy are depicted in popular culture, because quite often it's done really badly, and it, Rev is still like pretty much the best example.
Oh yeah.
But so I loved Fleabag. I fell in love with the hot priest, like seemingly everybody else did, and I cried at the end. There's one scene which is really problematic, involves a confessional, but one of the things that happened following the series was that people started, I kept seeing online talk of hot priests. And there was an article in The Guardian which was odd on multiple levels. And the first odd thing about it was actually written by an American in New York about a church in New York. So I'd to me, it would have made more sense as a British person writing about a British church, because Fleabag is British, and so is The Guardian. But this article came out that this person who said, oh, so there's a hot priest in Fleabag. I'm going to set out and see if my local church has a hot priest.
Oh.
And they go to this church in New York, in Manhattan, and they talk about going to the service, receiving communion. Like they go in and they're looking, and they describe 2 out of the 3 clergy people who were on duty that day. And I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it was 2 women and 1 man. And so they're talking about the attractiveness, but only of 2 out of the 3. And I wrote an article in response to this, just on my own site. Like I didn't contact The Guardian and say, can you please publish a rebuttal with this? But for me, one of the deeply problematic things is that as a woman priest, and as somebody who, I passionately believe one of the reasons I'm in the Church of England is to be a woman here, and to fight for things like women bishops and fight for equality and all of that thing. And one of the things that women in leadership in the church have had to deal with is people being unable to distinguish between women as like almost sexual objects and women who are priests. And there'd been some research in the United Methodist Church where they'd gathered comments that men had made to women clergy that reference like their body, or one of them was, when you say in communion, this is my body, all I can think of is your body under your cassock. Just like terrible things. So I was kind of like, yes, the priest in Fleabag is hot, but if we are setting out to, like, I think I was talking about like the fetishization of hot priests. Actually, what we're doing is applying a lot of the stuff that women have had to really battle to overcome, and it's just inappropriate. Like, it's inappropriate when you do it to a woman, and it's inappropriate when you do it to a man. But the almost the funniest thing about this was that after I had published this article on my website and I shared it on Facebook, a friend of mine who is a priest in New York commented on it and said, funny thing about this, I am the 3rd priest who was on duty that day who does not get mentioned in the article. And she said, luckily I have a good sense of humour, but I could have interpreted this as I am not hot at all, and she didn't mention me. So already the article is terrible, but then she's kind of come out of it going, what? And you didn't see I wasn't even considered as a hot priest.
Oh dear. No.
And it is funny because it makes me think, and I just only very recently, a friend of mine found out I hadn't watched series 2 of Fleabag. She watched the first one. I was like, oh, you've got to watch it, hot priest. And she said, oh, can you say hot priest? And I was like, well, he is universally referred to as hot priest, but I can tell you my mini thesis on why this is a problematic thing to do. But yeah, really, just a really interesting thing about like being careful about how we use language and actually what the wider implications of that is. And also, like, please don't ever go to communion service and take communion just so that you can get up close and personal with a priest. Like, it's just not.
No, that's not good. I didn't see the second series, but it's making me squirm as well. I think I really enjoyed Rev. I mean, he is a really nice, ordinary guy, or he seems to be anyway.
Yes, and stuff happens to him, which I know has happened to people who I know. Luckily, not so much the breakdown during midnight mass, but I mean, you know, there's an episode. In fact, it might be the midnight mass episode where he is desperately trying to get to visit an elderly person, and stuff keeps happening, and he can't get there. And he gets there, and she's already died. And I think most clergy at some point in their ministry have that happen to them. Like, I know my dad, after he watched that episode, he said, "Yeah, that happened to me. It was awful." But we actually can't be everywhere at all times, and like, ministry pulls us in like innumerable different directions. So actually showing that is really great, because I think often what we see on TV are that, you know, the priests who rock up at the hospital in the funny clothes and do something that we probably would never do if we were actually called to a hospital.
That's right. I think we have to choose the human aspect of the priest, doesn't it? Yeah, it is much more important. So, Liz, what's next on the horizon for you in your busy life? Any plans?
That's a really good question. So at the moment, so because part of my role is looking after curates, we're heading into ordination season. So we have our priestings next week and deacon ordination at St Paul's Cathedral at the beginning of July, which is always pretty spectacular. And particularly because these are the first sort of normal, in inverted commas, ordinations for 3 years. So that's a big deal. So I've got new intake of deacons coming in, which is great. It's the thing I love about working with curates is that you get to work with people who are right at the beginning of their ministry, so they're not jaded and cynical, and they're usually quite enthusiastic. No, so it's quite an encouraging part of my work, is getting to know them and hearing what they're doing, and they're all so different. I mean, it's partly the joy of being in London. So they're a really, really diverse group of people. But yeah, so I've got a new cohort of deacons to get to know from the beginning of July. And then holiday. That's pretty much the next thing on the agenda.
Not to Tongan, I suspect.
No, I'd like to go back one day, but it's a very long way to go.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, I wish you all the very best for these new deacons. I have no doubt that you're an inspiration to them. It's been very, very nice talking to you, Liz.
Likewise.
And I've been inspired, I think, on several things. I think the first one will be next time I'm down in London to do that trip around on the bus as well.
Yeah.
And I think if I get a free Friday morning, I'm going to see if I can pop to the local cinema as well.
Yeah, do that.
So thanks for being on the podcast, Liz.
No problem. Thank you, Jenny.
Take care.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.